Hi, I'm Eric Aronson. This presentation will take a look at risk and reward in fixed income investing. Risk is something that many of us take for granted. After all, how many of us jump out of airplanes or walk tightropes on a regular basis? But risk is something that is around us all the time and plays an important part in our decisions. The flip side of risk is reward, and it too can come in many forms. No matter if it's a pat on the back or something more tangible, such as a pile of money, our decisions are influenced by our perception of potential reward. Although investment risk can come in different forms, it can be distilled to the risk of losing money. Fixed income investors face this in the form of price risk, the risk that the value of their investment declines. Payment risk, the risk that investors will not receive all of the cash flow they are expecting. And timing risk, the risk that cash flow will arrive sooner or later than expected. Investment rewards can be similarly distilled to a core principle, which is how much money an investment may generate. Yield to maturity, which is a measure of expected return over an investment's life, is one way to think about possible investment reward. Expected total return assumes a specific holding period and is another way to think about potential reward. An important thing to keep in mind is that these considerations are based on expectations of possible risk and possible rewards. The risk of what could go wrong, an investment having more risk than anticipated, or risks that are not known are all examples. Similarly, we have only expected performance, which can be impacted by various risk factors, so that the actual performance can never be known until the investment has run its full course. The analysis of risk and reward can be thought of as a balancing of possible goods versus potential trouble. I like to use the teeter-totter analogy when thinking about investment risk and reward. The end of the teeter-totter move up and down in opposite directions, and balance is achieved when weight on both sides matches. We start with an empty teeter-totter. We add risk to one end of the teeter-totter. The risk end of the teeter-totter drops. The risk can be balanced by weighing the other end of the teeter-totter. We use reward as a counterweight. With the right amount of reward, the teeter-totter comes back to an even balance. Although this may sound fairly simple, this is really a complex process because the risk and reward factors we discussed earlier are based on assumptions and expectations and thus may not be known with precision. In other words, the size of the risk and reward are uncertain or fuzzy. Let's go back to a simpler diagram where we have an initial balance between risk and reward, but over time the risk may decrease, causing the balance to tilt toward reward. The reward will need to decrease for the risk and reward to once again be in balance. Similarly, if risk increases, then the balance shifts toward risk, and a larger expected reward is required to restore balance. Recall that risk can be summarized as price risk, payment risk, and timing risk. And reward can be summarized as expected yield to maturity or total return. If one of the risks increase, such as payment risk, the overall investment risk increases, throwing the balance askew. Investors will demand a larger reward to compensate them for the increased risk, and thus restoring the balance. Let's go back to our simple diagram. The best situation from an investor's perspective is to buy bonds where the yield is larger than the expected risk, and the balance is in the investor's favor. These situations are often difficult to find and may require research and analysis to identify opportunities where risk may not be as big as they seem. The initial situation appears balanced. The size of the risk is balanced by the amount of the reward. However, through research and analysis, an investor may determine that the actual risk is much smaller than the market's view. assuming the yield does not change. The smaller risk will tip this balance to the investor's favor. These types of situations may be short-lived. As a wider group of investors comes to identify the same opportunities, the size of the expected risk as seen by the markets shrinks, which produces a corresponding decrease in rewards expected by investors and a return to balance. The mechanism driving the balance of risk and reward is supply and demand. If a reward is deemed larger than the risk, investor demand will drive the yield lower to restore balance. The investor preference for higher yields relative to expected risk keeps the trade-off between risk and reward largely balanced under normal market conditions. In the end, it is important to remember that there is no free lunch. All things being equal, an investor should assume higher yields may mean an investment has higher risks. This concludes our presentation on risk and reward. We hope that you have found this information helpful and hope that you will view another TCW University presentation.